Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and we're back for part 3 of my 7-part series on how I became the activist I am today. We covered what I learned growing up and in high school, the unusual experience of taking biology of sex in college, and now we're going to talk about when it got really up close and personal. I met my future husband when I was in college, and as we started talking about marriage, we also started talking about having children. And I went over my immunization records and saw that I'd never had a rubella shot. So I scheduled one and went in for it. Now, before the rubella shot, the nurse admonished me to be careful with birth control because if I got pregnant in the next 3 months, I'd have to have an abortion. The doctor said the same thing. And even at the time, before I was an activist, I thought that was a little bit odd because if this was about women making choices, like my professor said it was, wouldn't it make sense that they would just tell me what the risks were so that I could make that choice myself? And also, if the risks were so serious that I would have to have an abortion, why didn't they tell me to abstain? But that kind of just percolated. It didn't move me to abstain. I probably would have if they'd have mentioned it, but it wasn't on their radar, so impressionable teenager, it wasn't on mine either. Then I had a pregnancy scare. I had developed some health problems, which meant I had to have a lot of diagnostic tests, including injectable dyes and x-rays. And an overzealous x-ray technician told my doctor that he thought I might be pregnant. When my doctor relayed this to me, I panicked. First of all, I just had the rubella vaccine and I'd been told I would have to have an abortion. And then I had just been subject to pelvic x-rays and injectable dyes. And I was sure that if I was pregnant, that would mean there was something horrible wrong with my baby. And I had been taught in college, in my biology of sex class, that it was really cruel to inflict a horrible disability on an innocent child. And I started calling around everybody I could think of. What do you think? What are the odds I'm actually pregnant? What risks are associated with this? And everybody was just like, look, if you're pregnant, you can talk to a doctor. I wanted to know now what was happening. So and this was before EPT. You couldn't just pee on a stick at home and find out what was going on. You had to wait until your period was a couple of weeks late to get a urine pregnancy test. But I could spend 2 weeks grocery money on a blood test to find out for sure. Now, while I was waiting for the results, my husband and I talked a lot about what we would do. And gradually it occurred to us that it wouldn't be inflicting a disability on a baby. I mean, the baby either existed or didn't, and if the baby existed, it either had a disability or didn't. It was a matter of, do we kill a baby just because it has a disability? Now, I was so relieved when the pregnancy test came back negative, but that really gave me this feeling of how cruel it is to be putting this idea into women's heads even before they're pregnant, that if there's something wrong with the baby, they would be monsters if they didn't abort. And since then, I've encountered so many stories of women with an unfavorable prenatal diagnosis who get badgered to abort. Some of them, they abort and find out there was nothing wrong with the baby after all. We have 2 deaths with that situation, Marla Cardamone and Allegra Roseberry. I'll provide links. But also, a lot of women carried to term. Their doctors abandoned them. They had to find other OBGYNs. The way women get treated with fetal indications is absolutely unconscionable. But again, fortunately, I wasn't actually pregnant, but I decided I was not going to go through an emotional ringer like that again, and I wasn't going to take any more risks. I was going on the pill. So I went down to Harrisburg Reproductive Services to get put on birth control. And there were a couple of things that struck me a little odd there, too. One was that there was a sign in the office, back in the their area, not out in the waiting room, that said procedures are done on Wednesdays. And I knew that procedures was abortions. And it struck me as odd. Well, why can't you say abortions are done on Wednesdays? Why do you have to kind of weasel and call it procedures? They also had this framed newspaper article about a former criminal abortionist and what a wonderful hero he was. And I thought, even if you think abortion is necessary, that seemed to me like a little bit of overkill. So I had my exam. They gave me my script for birth control pills. And then they said, be careful to follow the instructions. We don't want you back here for an abortion. Again, trying to sell me an abortion before I was even pregnant. That ticked me off. I did not go back to that clinic until I came back several years later with a picket sign in my hands. Stay tuned for part 4 of my trip to becoming an activist.